Thank you, Priyanka. It's an absolute privilege to be here. Continuing the opening keynote that Pari Natarajan gave, I was deeply inspired by that, where Pari outlined the mega trends that is going to shape up the next decade or so. And the underlying connect there is the future of work and associated labor characteristics or the labor strategy that companies should design. And it is very, very critical to design a very effective talent strategy and sustain that to win this growth war. And today we'll be sharing some of our insights from Drop that we have gathered through our AI platform and also our engagement with well over 100 plus customers. We're delighted to share how companies can use some of that data sets and strategies to reboot and reimagine their enterprise. Let me actually begin with some historical perspectives. Now, today, if you in digital software-driven world, the economies are largely skill biased. What do I mean by that? That means if your organizations or your country has a lot of skills, that is bound to translate into higher GDP growth and higher output. But if you look at the history and go back to the first industrial revolution, like somewhere around 1800s, that wasn't the case. In fact, the opposite effect was in place. And many labor market economists would consider the study done by Andrew Urey as a very, very important study. And Dr. Urey actually called this removing the task from cunning workman. What that means is Urey spent countless hours in manufacturing cotton plants and really looking at what is the most skilled worker doing there and how am I going to kind of de-skill that so that unskilled labor can really produce. So incidentally, there was actually a growth of unskilled labor around that time frame. Then the economy sort of shifted towards more automation and skilled workers. And some would regard that this is actually an origin of automation that kind of started here. The reason that I say that is today's modern society's digital initiatives are not just driven by automation. The modern digital initiatives really have to enable like collaboration. And there was actually a great panel discussion in the first session where the products have to communicate a form of empathy. It has to enable remote work now post the pandemic, and it has to give, more importantly, an experience to the customers. And it is this multiple priorities that companies are really adopting and favoring multiple digital initiatives. And one of the interesting things that has happened in the last 1 decade or so is the trust that we place on technology is progressively increasing. Today, if you walk into a retail store and if you see a bot that would give you product descriptions and where products are stored, you actually intuitively trust that. And that has actually changed in the last 2 decades or so dramatically. And it is the confluence of these various initiatives that companies are putting out or undertaking, especially post the pandemic, and has resulted in recruitment wanting to hire tech talent at both from an IT standpoint and from a product engineering standpoint. And they are facing really, really tough conditions. If you look at the global supply-demand gap for tech talent, it is around 4.47 million professionals. And that is expected to grow almost to 8 million in the next 4 to 5 years. And today, an average time to fill job for a global average across even a simple tech job is 50 plus days. Makes you wonder if there is anything called a simple tech job anymore. There is a huge competition from enterprises, and at the same time, venture capitals have unleashed funds, and there is a huge talent war across both enterprises and startups. And against this backdrop, we are also seeing some some sort of effects that are making this a lot more challenging. Now, the new concept is to make sure that organizations can compete in a remote workforce environment. That means if companies are choosing to wanting to go back the old way of doing things, they may be exposing themselves to talent loss. And similarly, there are also some dynamics about how do we challenges around enabling women and other multiple diverse workforce, bringing them into tech. And that has become a boardroom conversation across every single client situation that we are involved in. And against this backdrop, one other thing that is also happening is keeping leaders awake. And that is the demand for frontline workers is also increasing. That means today, a bank is really not able to hire a teller that easily as they were, just like last year. Supply chain companies are unable to find truck drivers. In some ways, some of the insurance company jobs, such as underwriting and other jobs that we thought would be automated by now, there is still a heavy human involvement in those jobs. So what has happened is the effect of AI and automation that we sort of expected in the early 2000 or even mid 2000 hasn't really materialized the same way that we wanted it to be. I very well remember that the call center strategies in early 2005 would be around, there will be no calls by 2020, but that has not happened yet. That doesn't mean the progress is not there for a variety of reasons and how you make AI work into AGI. All those considerations have little bit slowed the effect of automation, and that is being felt by recruitment infrastructure in conjunction with actually hiring for tech talent. Now, in order to enable their technology initiatives, companies are looking at every single corner in the world. And today, there are hotspots in Eastern Europe, hotspots in Southeast Asia, newer hotspots coming up in Latin America, Central America. And some of the progress that Argentina and Brazil that have made in the field of education is just outstanding. 1/4 of the GDP spend of Argentina goes into education. Similarly, Mexico has transformed their tech ecosystem in a very, very big way. Guadalajara is a very, very emerging, solid tech hub. And in this, while the advantage is there among the large hubs of USA, China, and India, it is highly encouraging that it is beginning to spread out. For example, Rwanda has a very active tech ecosystem where there is about 250 consumer software tech companies. And this is actually a very encouraging sign. And we hope that the companies would continue to tap into these global hotspots. Now, when you look at large markets like US, something very interesting is happening. For the first time post the pandemic, we are seeing some movement into middle cities. So more people are moving into Denver, more people are moving into Midwest cities. From San Francisco, more people are moving from places like New York into Middle America. Dallas is a big beneficiary in this process. And also some of the areas of Raleigh. Apple has actually very recently prioritized Raleigh as their key hub. And many experiments are also happening in a positive way. Apple, for example, sent a team of 5 engineers to a place called Columbus, Georgia. And they in turn worked for the last 2 years and built a team of about 15 engineers working with the local universities, local companies, understanding where the talent is, and built a small team. And that's a very, very powerful case study. And Facebook is also trying to prioritize places like Alabama, where they are now seeing that there is a potential diversity of STEM talent that is coming up across multiple ethnicities. And these are very interesting dynamics that need to be considered when you are designing and reimagining your talent strategies. And as you look at from a global standpoint as well, countries are gearing up in a very big way to attract global tech talent. And the success story has been from Canada, where in the last 3 to 4 years, they have worked very hard to attract foreign student enrollments into their universities. And that is evident by a growth of about 13% in 2020 compared to the previous year. And also their progressive immigration policies is well received by the tech community, and they have done incredibly well benchmarking their policies against other policies. Perhaps one dynamic that also need to be understood is really the last few years, because of the complex rhetorics that took place in the United States and the associated stress points around immigration and other related policies, we actually saw an increase in H-1B denials in the US. And unfortunately, as it started reversing, the world went into the COVID freeze. So the long-term effect of this is still being debated and adjusted and modeled. But I think this is one critical area where the US potentially lost some degree of talent because of the complex rhetorics around immigration. Now, whether you could actually see, to summarize, you have complex digital initiatives that are employee-facing, customer-facing, and you have to do it in rapid timeframes. You have limited in-house talent, so you have to build that talent and then execute on these priorities. All that means that the supply-demand gap for tech talent, which is, as I mentioned in the beginning, from 4.46 million is expected to grow to 8.04 million by 2026. And that's we took into consideration multiple components such as the graduating talent supply pool and how much adjacent talent pool could potentially come in, and the convergence of IT and software that was briefly discussed here in the morning session. All that would still mean that we have a substantial gap. Now, when faced with this gap, this type of a gap, recruiters are going to feel it, leaders are going to feel it, boardrooms are going to be discussing about it on an ongoing basis. And that means that we truly have come to a reimagination point. And one of the components that Pari highlighted yesterday in his keynote is you simply can't continue to handle the next phase of this evolution with your older practices. So we have to reimagine the enterprise and reboot the enterprise. So what are the elements of reboot that we can think about when it comes to procuring skills? Because we do have to dynamically shift the way we procure skills. We can't go about, here are the requirements, let's type that up, let's put a JD, and then let's go procure the skill. And one important component that we actually put to use is ability to take advantage of the feeder roles. Here I'm showcasing an example of an engineering company where there is a lot more automation across traditional areas of engineering. How would we bring them into AI and autonomous systems, whether that is machine learning engineer or data science type of layers or embedded systems layers, and so on. And for that, there are multiple steps involved in that, looking at historical career progressions in terms of today's machine learning engineer, what is their origin points? Like what did they do before? What did they do prior to that? And you can kind of re-engineer that path and design a reskilling propensity index. And that involves multiple components like commitment from leadership. But one of the important things that we found it useful is mapping role transitions and the relationships. That means bringing in a very clear integration of career transition with reskilling. So not to do reskilling initiatives in an isolated manner, but tie it with the career conversations that you are having and the performance conversations that you are having. So there are, in transitioning, say something like a systems data analyst to a machine learning engineer, there are multiple N nodes, intermediate nodes. And those intermediate nodes are also very useful for the current digital transformation. So mapping how long it would take and setting the right expectations with your employees is a very, very important component of your reimagined enterprise activity. And this is one area where it can help you in two ways. One is you can take advantage of people who are in the adjacent zones within your enterprise. And the other is actually, if this can be developed into a mechanism for recruitment, we can also tap into other other adjacent skills within the market and then accelerate towards that hiring. Now, the second component that we bring it to your attention is how do we actually reimagine our associations, enterprises associations with universities? And that means that we would have to work with not just with very reputed universities, but also smaller universities, community colleges, and other institutes that can slowly improve the readiness of the universities. And actually, companies like Microsoft have done this in places like Suzhou, for example, where they work with local universities to improve the English language proficiency of the engineering graduates. And if you look at India, we have about 1 million plus graduates who are coming out qualified, but the people who are ready to join an enterprise is only about 1/4 of that, or about 23 to 24%. And there is a huge opportunity. It is actually an opportunity because there is something that India can actually work on and increase that. And even if we move the needle a little bit, that results in a huge supply of talent pool that can be put into use. And the other aspect to that, an enabling factor to that is not be so attached to the bigger established cities. If you look at the distribution of engineering graduates across tier 1 cities and smaller cities, 55% of the engineering graduation is happening in smaller cities and smaller towns. And not everybody will have the luxury or the means to come to a bigger city like a Bangalore or a Hyderabad or a Delhi and start their job search process. And many of them simply get left out, or they just take the job that comes their way and lose the engineering curriculum that they went through. And if we can start thinking about rural hubs, now one of the advantages that we have is the acceleration of cloud initiatives. We can pretty much work from anywhere. How do we use this vantage point and accelerate rural hubs and take the work to some of these larger rural hubs and enable talent pool in a significant way? And that can open up the readiness of India's huge graduating talent pool. One more component that I'm personally a big fan of is there is also the demand. There is a desirable demand growth, and then there is an undesirable demand growth, especially when it comes to the technology infrastructure. There is a lot of internal requests that come into play, meaning how do you get data to finance? How do you support HR with various data sets? How do you put out applications for data inquiry? And if citizens development can be more broadly adopted, that can actually check some of the undesirable demand growth, where some of the existing teams can be equipped to handle bulk of their need in a self-serviced way. Actually, Google is doing a lot of experiments like this where they want their finance team not to be dependent on their IT team to run reports or collect data. So they are training them in multiple languages and tools so that they could do some of their activities themselves. And this is a very, very important layer when it comes to reimagining the tech talent strategy. And one of the important component at the end of the day for us to have a winning labor strategy, it has to be an inclusive strategy. Today, we have a lot of vulnerabilities in this. We are seeing an unwanted trend of lower women participation in the tech talent, in the tech labor market. We are also not seeing enough diversity in markets like the US when it comes to ethnicity diversity. And the ability to tap into neurodiversity is becoming high, but we haven't really made substantial progress in tapping into neurodiverse candidates. And also, there is multiple initiatives to bring in, how do you integrate the Gen Z workforce more seamlessly into the tech development ecosystem. And also, the way of work like contingent labor, which is a very important labor strategy, but it is happening more at micro steps level, not necessarily integrated well into the agile development cycles. And these are sort of the opportunities around equality and how equitable we can be across all workforce segments is going to dictate whether we have a winning labor strategy or not. And the important thing, we may have many conditions to handle. Perhaps there is one cure for all this, and that is really learning. If we have a very strong learning strategy, and if we can make that learning strategy available across all sections of the enterprise, and even make it available to external ecosystem, then we can build a very powerful labor strategy and talent strategy, and we can compete in a very powerful way and execute on all the mega trends that Pari spoke about in his keynote. Thank you so much. A privilege for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Vijay. Some really powerful points there. We do have an audience question for you. Mukesh Lalchandani would like to know, looking at current talent war, where we see that the cost of having the right talent is very high, how does India position as compared to global suppliers from an economic standpoint?
Absolutely. I think the cost in India is going up, but so are the costs across all the locations. And I think, as I said, India is the third, when it comes to core software talent, the third largest supply. So it is an undeniable force. It's already a force in global initiatives. Even in highly regulated industries, India is playing a dominant role. I think for India to innovate on the cost advantage, we really have to tap into talent that is hidden in the rural engineering colleges, rural centers, and that can give even more cost advantage for the next 10 to 15 years. And also, how do we truly upskill adjacent talent that is digitally savvy? Perhaps they do not know certain products and solutions and languages, but India can actually upskill into that and provide yet another opportunity from a labor supply standpoint. And that reskillable talent itself is around 2.5 million people in India. So these are massive numbers. So our belief is India will maintain the cost advantage in comparison with other global locations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those insights, Vijay, and for your time today.
Thank you.